The Villisca axe murders are some of the most baffling and historical murders of the 20th century. In the sleepy town of Villisca, Iowa, the Moore family was viciously and methodically struck down in their home in the evening hours of June 9th and June 10th, 1912. The victims included Josiah B. Moore, Sarah Moore, and their 4 children, Herman, Mary, Arthur, and Paul. 2 other children, Lena and Ina, were struck down as well. At the time of the murders, Villisca was a thriving rural town with 2,500 people, and Josiah Moore was one of its most prominent businessmen and citizens. Due to the rural nature of this region of Iowa, Moore built his business, the Moore Implement Company. The company was a John Deere franchise and sold tractors and other farming equipment to the area's ranchers and farmers. The community remarked that Josiah and the Moores were well liked in the community and were willing to help their neighbors at the drop of a hat. They were also established members of the Presbyterian Church. On the morning following the murders, neighbors noticed something was awry. The Moores had not left their house by 7 a.m., which was extremely odd. They were known to take their morning chores, and the house seemed quiet to start the day. Mary Peckham was the first to check on the Moore house. She knocked on the door, but to no avail. Feeling concerned, she called Josiah's brother Ross to check on the family. Ross loudly knocked and looked through the windows, however, they were all covered. He decided to enter the residence. As he turned the key and opened the door and peered around, he realized something unfathomable had taken place. He instructed Mary to get the sheriff. Upon investigation, Josiah and Sarah were found in their bed, which occupied an upstairs loft area. Both had been bludgeoned with an axe. In the adjoining room, Herman, Mary, Boyd, and Paul were found killed the same way. Downstairs in a bedroom off the main living area, the 2 young guests, Lena and Ina, were discovered. One of the baffling things about this murder is how people were killed in such a way without anyone waking up at any point. The only victim with defensive wounds was Lena. It makes one wonder if some that were killed woke up at some point and then were placed back in their beds after the murders. It is believed that the murders took place shortly after midnight. The evidence left behind was extremely shocking. In the ceiling above Sarah and Josiah, plaster was knocked out, indicating the axe was lifted high above their heads and dropped with massive force. The murder weapon was found in the Stillinger bedroom, still covered in blood. The axe apparently was on the property and belonged to Josiah, indicating it was not brought to the scene prior to the crime. In maybe the most twisted discovery, it appeared the murderer covered the faces of the victims with linens and clothing. Additionally, a wash basin and a plate of uneaten food was left on the table. It is believed whoever committed the crime stayed in the house for some time after their murders. After the town marshal was informed, news spread like wildfire. Due to the nature of being a small rural town and the unprecedented nature of the crime, hundreds of people flocked to the Moore house. The scene was difficult to control. Many people got into the house in the early phases of the investigation, tampering any evidence collection. The Iowa National Guard had to be dispatched to secure the house. Additionally, several posses were formed to scour the countryside for any potential suspects, even though nobody had any idea who they were looking for. Hysteria ran rampant. Some of the initial thoughts that the murderer was a railroad tramp. Due to the nature of the railroads flooding in and out of town, railroad hobos were popping in and out of Villisca daily. One of the main early suspects was a transient loner named Andy Sawyer. He had been known throughout town to sleep in his clothes, as well as sleep with an axe. However, after being turned into the sheriff on June 18th, he was discovered he was not even in town the night of the murder. He had been arrested for vagrancy on June 9th in Osceola, Iowa. Another theory was that of a serial killer that was active during this time. In the fall of 1911, there were several murders of entire families that stretched from Colorado Springs, Illinois, and Kansas. The murders in Paola, Kansas occurred on June 5, 1912, just 4 days before the Moore slayings in Villisca. This theory was dismissed despite several similarities. Several other prospects would eventually come to light, one being a former business associate of Josiah, Frank had hired Josiah to work as a salesman. When Josiah left Frank Jones's company, he was able to pull the John Deere franchise with him. This would cause major strife between Frank and Josiah. By 1910, the two were not even on speaking terms and would not even acknowledge each other when they passed each other in town. Frank Jones was also an Iowa state senator. A man named William Mansfield was said to have been hired by Jones to kill the family. Mansfield was arrested in 1916 but was never charged, as his alibi checked out. The damage on Frank Jones stuck, and his reputation was destroyed. He would eventually lose his re-election bid for Iowa state senator. There has never been any concrete connection between Frank Jones and the murders, but his reputation was nevertheless gone. The most prominent suspect was Reverend George Kelly. Kelly was a traveling preacher who had some less than savory predilections, to say the least. He was preaching at the Children's Day celebration the day of the murders, an event in which the Moores attended. It is thought that he left town shortly before the murders took place. However, he piqued suspicion when he began sending letters to state officials and Moore family members about the murders. He ended up returning to Villisca 2 weeks after the crime and visited the house. At this time and before the murders, he was also seen peeping into women's bedrooms and asking women to pose for him. Kelly was also observed wandering other local towns and performing the same bizarre behavior throughout the region. He was arrested in April 1917 and gave a confession in August of that same year. He stated that he was walking around Villisca the night of the killings and spied the Stillinger girls through the Moore house windows. He said he heard God's voice say, quote, "Suffer the children to come unto me," end quote. However, at trial, the jury was deadlocked. A second trial acquitted him of all charges. Many people in the county still believed that Frank Jones had something to do with the killings and that Kelly was a pawn. Either way, active investigations into the murders closed in 1917. In my opinion, I think this was the work of the serial killer that was active in the area. While Jones had a personal motive, the viciousness of the killings and the intricacies of a cover-up don't fit the narrative. It seems too good to be true. Ultimately, if he did hire someone to commit the murders, his entire reputation was nevertheless destroyed after having never had anything to do with them. Reverend Kelly, in my opinion, was nothing more than a wayward, transient creep. It is also thought that he was coerced into writing his confession. Going from being a peeping Tom and generally creepy dude to a savage family massacre is quite an escalation in violence. All in all, the Moore family and two young girls of the Stillinger family were heinously killed for no reason. Their memory remains in Villisca as they are buried at the local cemetery. This case remains as one of the most fascinating, baffling, and gruesome murders in American history. I want to thank you for watching this episode from Everything Has History. Let me know in the comments below what your theories are. Also, give a like of this video and subscribe to my channel. And I will see you on the next episode from Everything Has History.